I'm Polly, a 38-year-old novelist who loves to write mysteries and leads the kind of life that many people only dream of. My books have devoted readers, and writing helps me provide for my family. Stephen, our 9-year-old son, and I have been married to Peter for 10 years. Peter worked when we first got married, but as my career took off, he left his job. He hasn't done anything for the past few years, usually spending his days playing pachinko. I recently learned of something unsettling. Peter has been dishonest, using my credit card to lavishly buy designer goods on someone else. For the sake of our son, I've tolerated his behavior, but I've had enough. It's time for a change. I can no longer wait. This shift was brought about by the most unlikely person, someone I never would have imagined coming to my support, stepping in to assist me. I saw Peter one day dressed absolutely out of character in a suit, which was unusual for him. I asked him about it, curious. He told me he was off to a job interview after initially appearing surprised. "It's time I started working again," he replied. I wanted to believe him, that at last he was considering how he could better himself for the future of our family. I wished him well and went back to work, realizing I had a deadline approaching. The hours passed, and Peter didn't come back until 2 in the morning. I realized at that moment that I couldn't let things stay the same because of the late hour and the enigmatic job interview, which left me with more questions than answers. For the sake of my future and that of our son, it was time to face the facts of our circumstances and make some difficult choices. Peter shambled in the door that evening, his breath heavy with perfume and vodka. Tired, or was he simply being irresponsible? He fell back on the living room sofa, his smartphone falling out of his palm but staying unlocked. I couldn't help but give in to my curiosity and suspicions. I grabbed his phone and quickly looked at it. Unquestionable evidence that my husband was having an extramarital affair with my best friend Nancy was what I discovered there, and it shocked me to my core. Only hours before, they'd been at an upscale restaurant with a stunning view of the night sky. It seemed like a bodily blow to be betrayed. How could I be subjected to this abuse by both Nancy and Peter, who were married? I suppressed my tears since I didn't want to wake Peter. I silently copied the damning pictures and texts to my phone. I had to gather myself and carefully consider what to do next. As if nothing had happened, I questioned Peter about his night the next morning. "Peter, let's talk about yesterday. Despite your claim to have had an interview, you arrived home somewhat late. What took place?" His eyes darted away, giving off an uneasy vibe as he searched for an explanation. "I ran into a friend after the interview, and we went out for drinks," he stated. He denied it when I questioned him about the identity of the acquaintance. "Catherine, just some dude. I mean, do I really need to explain everything?" I bit my frustration back and said nothing. His avoidance not only strengthened my resolve to deal with the problem as dignifiedly and strategically as possible, but it also reinforced my worst assumptions. It has been a month since that discovery, and Peter's treachery still carries a heavy burden. Since I know that confronting him could permanently damage our family, I haven't done so yet. If it were just me, I would have already shown him the proof and asked for a divorce. But because of our son and the complicated feelings he brings, I've had to carefully weigh every option, since I know that whatever I choose would have a lifelong impact on our family. The notion of taking my 9-year-old son Stephen away from his father was intolerable, even with all of the agony in my heart. Though he claimed that his frequent outings were to visit friends or decompress, in reality, they served as the ideal pretext for me to obtain proof of Peter's adultery, something I had been growing suspicious of. One day, seizing an opportunity while Peter was out, I rummaged through his belongings and found a stack of receipts for women's designer items, luxuries I certainly hadn't received. None of these high-end goods were in our home, leading me to one painful conclusion. Peter was lavishing these expensive gifts on Nancy, my so-called best friend. But the mystery deepened. How was Peter financing these extravagant purchases? He hadn't worked in years and was living off the modest allowance I gave him from my earnings. Concerned and needing answers, I devised a plan to follow him. I called my brother to watch Stephen, cloaking my real intentions under the guise of a shopping trip. "Hey, sorry to bother you out of the blue, but can you watch Stephen for a bit?" "I want to go shopping alone," I told him. My brother, puzzled because I usually preferred online shopping, raised an eyebrow. "Shopping? You've never been one to shop in person. What's up?" "Normally, yes, but today I need something from a store. Can you watch him for me?" I replied. He agreed, albeit with a reminder not to be gone long as Stephen might get lonely. With my brother's help, I was free to track Peter. I spotted him downtown, arm in arm with Nancy, strolling into a high-end designer store with unsettling familiarity. Watching them together, a mix of hurt and anger surged through me. As they approached the cashier, I saw something that truly shocked me. Peter was paying with a credit card. My heart sank as I realized it was my secondary credit card, the one I usually left in an unattended drawer at home. Peter had taken it without my knowledge. The betrayal was deeper and more complex than I had imagined. Witnessing it firsthand was painful, but armed me with the undeniable proof I needed. Now I had to decide what to do next, knowing that whatever steps I took would impact not just my life, but Stephen's as well. Over the past few months, while I was making significant purchases for my home office, including monitors, keyboards, and new furniture, I hadn't realized that Peter was exploiting this flurry of activity to cover his deceitful expenditures. Both our credit cards were linked to the same bank account, and amidst my hectic schedule, I hadn't scrutinized the statements closely enough. This oversight now haunted me as it became painfully clear. Not only was Peter unfaithful, but he was also misusing my funds to shower gifts on his mistress. Any remaining fondness I felt for my husband evaporated in the wake of this revelation. Although part of me blamed myself for not noticing earlier, I found it impossible to forgive his betrayal. I managed to snap some clear photos of Peter and Nancy together and headed home, my mind boiling with anger. In the following days, my thoughts turned to revenge. I frequently checked Peter's usual computer, knowing he left it unlocked and easily accessible when he wasn't around. Digging into his communications with Nancy, I soon discovered their plans for a romantic getaway to Kagoshima over the upcoming long weekend. A 5-day escape that seemed tailor-made for my plans of retribution. However, I faced a significant dilemma, ensuring my son Stephen remained shielded from the ugly truth about his father's actions. I reached out to my brother again, hoping he could help by looking after Stephen. "Hey bro, sorry to bother you again, but could you watch Stephen for me during the upcoming long weekend?" His response, though supportive, carried a hint of concern. "You mean for all 5 days?" he asked, sounding surprised. Before I could reply, he added firmly, "Catherine, stop trying to handle everything on your own. Peter's cheating on you, isn't he?" I was taken aback by his directness. "How did you know?" I asked, my voice a mixture of shock and curiosity. "I heard it from Stephen," he revealed. Hearing my son's name in this context was a jolt. Despite his young age, Stephen had sensed something was amiss with his father. This complicated things further, as it meant Stephen was more aware of the situation than I had hoped. Now I had to navigate not only my response to Peter's betrayal, but also how to protect my son from the emotional fallout. I hadn't realized how much Peter's actions were affecting Stephen until my brother pointed it out. Despite my efforts to shield him, Stephen had picked up on the tension and pain in our household. As I was grappling with these revelations, Stephen, having overheard our conversation, came into the room. "Mom, it's okay. I'm on your side," he said with a clarity that belied his young age. "Are you sure, Stephen?" I asked, touched by his understanding and support. "I don't want anyone who makes Mom sad." "As long as I have you, I'm okay," he replied confidently. "Thank you, Stephen." "And thank you too, bro," I expressed, feeling a surge of gratitude for their support. Bolstered by the encouragement of my son and brother, I resolved to take decisive action against Peter's betrayal. We began planning our move to a new home to coincide with Peter's planned getaway with his mistress. With my brother's assistance, we discreetly packed our belongings whenever Peter was out. The night before the long weekend, as Peter buzzed with excitement for his upcoming trip, I decided it was time to confront him and perhaps give him one last chance to explain himself. "Peter, what's with the suitcase? Why are you packing?" I inquired as he shuffled things around. "Oh, this? I'm going on a trip with a friend starting tomorrow," he answered nonchalantly. "A trip? Did you mention anything about that?" "It seems like a last-minute decision," I probed, hinting at my knowledge of his misuse of the allowance I gave him. My husband's annoyance was palpable as he tried to dismiss my questions. "Don't talk to me about it anymore, Catherine," he snapped. I lowered my voice, pressing him further. "Are you going on this trip with just a friend?" My tone caused him to flinch, his shoulders tensing as he realized the depth of my awareness. His reaction confirmed my suspicions, and I knew what I had to do next for myself and Stephen. Despite his obvious deceit, Peter tried to dismiss my concerns with a lie. "You've been nagging me a lot lately, Catherine," he said, trying to justify his secretive plans as a mere trip with a friend. "Have a good time." I retorted, my voice heavy with sarcasm. "Yeah, I'm excited for our new home," I said as I left the room. Deep down, if Peter had been honest with me, I might have considered resolving our issues more amicably, perhaps negotiating some alimony and child support even despite his infidelity. After all, there was a time when he was my pillar, supporting me when my novel struggled to find readers. I didn't want to hold on to hatred or resentment towards him. However, given the extent of his deception, I couldn't just stand by for the sake of my son and my future. Ending the relationship had become inevitable. There was no merit in preserving ties with someone so repeatedly dishonest. The next morning, by the time I woke up, Peter had already left for his trip. I checked the drawer immediately and, unsurprisingly, found my credit card missing. I promptly called the credit card company, reported the card as lost, and blocked any further transactions. As I was handling these logistics, my son Stephen woke up and greeted me with a bright smile. "Mom, today's the day, right?" he asked eagerly. "Huh?" I was momentarily confused. "We're moving to our new home today, right?" His eyes were alight with excitement. "That's right, Stephen. I've canceled the credit card, and now it's time for us to move on to our new home," I confirmed, feeling a mix of relief and anticipation. "Yeah, I'm excited for our new home," he exclaimed. With my brother's invaluable assistance, our move went smoothly. As we settled into our new environment, the sense of a fresh start was empowering. Stephen's enthusiasm and resilience reminded me that no matter how challenging the circumstances, a new beginning was not just possible, but also filled with potential. As we settled into our new home, I felt a sense of renewal wash over Stephen and me. Meanwhile, my husband's belongings were sent off to a location he had specified, marking a clear division in our lives. That tranquility was briefly interrupted the next day. While we relaxed in our new surroundings with my brother by our side for support, my phone rang. It was Peter. "Hello, Catherine." Is that you? Could you transfer me some money? I spent more than I planned, and now I need some extra cash, he said, clearly unaware that I had frozen the credit card he usually misused. Didn't you say you were going to stick to your allowance? I asked, my tone sharp. Come on, don't say that. I can't enjoy my trip if you do that, he complained. Aren't you with Nancy? I retorted, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Peter seemed taken aback. What are you talking about? Who's Nancy? What's going on with the card? It's pointless to play dumb. Your lies aren't working, I snapped, my patience worn thin. It's clear you've been cheating on me with my best friend Nancy. Did you think you wouldn't get caught? This isn't what it looks like. It's not cheating. He tried to justify himself, his voice desperate. My anger flared, fueled by his feeble attempts to deflect blame. With my brother and son within earshot, I no longer held back my fury. Stop making excuses. You have a family, yet you chose to have an affair and misuse someone else's credit card. Do you realize how low you've sunk? Catherine, let's calm down, Peter attempted to soothe the situation. Calm down. How can I stay calm when I'm speaking to the person who betrayed his family so thoughtlessly? My voice rose, an outpouring of emotions I had contained for far too long. The call ended with those unsparing words, leaving a heavy silence in the room. My brother placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, and Stephen looked up at me, his young face a mixture of confusion and concern. This moment, painful as it was, marked the beginning of a new chapter for us, one where we could move forward from the deception and hurt. Overwhelmed with a mixture of disgust and resolve, I made my feelings brutally clear to Peter. Let me make this clear. I have no intention of forgiving you or offering any help. You and the woman you cheated with can go straight to hell. Don't you dare show your face in front of me or Stephen ever again. With those final words, I hung up the phone, abruptly ending the call. Shortly after, Nancy, the woman he cheated with, called me. Her voice was tinged with demand. Catherine, what are you doing? She asked sharply. Nancy, long time no see. How's your trip with your best friend's husband going? I retorted, my words dripping with sarcasm. Shut up. Explain yourself. She snapped back. What are you talking about? She asked, feigning ignorance. Don't play dumb. You sent Peter's belongings to my house, didn't you? During our move, I had strategically shipped all of Peter's belongings to Nancy's house, fully aware that she was the other woman. Since Nancy was married, her husband was bound to be at home when the delivery arrived. I had included a detailed letter explaining the situation, ensuring that her husband would understand the full extent of our spouse's betrayal. As I shouted at Nancy over the phone, barely containing my rage, she blurted out, Are you serious? My husband found out, and he's furious. Isn't that expected? You're having an affair even though you're married. My supposed best friend did such a disgraceful thing. You're the worst. I'm incredibly disappointed in you. I fired back. Excuse me. She responded, taken aback. I think that's my line. You were the one having an affair with my husband. Do you think I'd forgive you for that? Who showed disrespect first, Nancy? I wasn't serious. It was just a fling. There's no way I'd settle for a jobless loser like him. She tried to minimize her actions. Whether you were serious or not doesn't matter to me, I replied coldly, cutting through her excuses. The betrayal had severed any ties of friendship we had, leaving only the stark reality of her deception. I informed her bluntly, I'm divorcing Peter, and your affair is a fact that I won't forgive. I'll be demanding the maximum compensation from both of you, so be prepared. Compensation? I didn't agree to that. Why should I pay compensation? Nancy protested, her voice tinged with panic. It's only natural. You did something that warrants it, I replied firmly. But wait, I'm a housewife. I can't afford to pay compensation, she stammered. That's for you to figure out. Maybe you can ask your husband for help, though I doubt he'll be inclined to assist you now, I said coldly. Wait a minute, Catherine, please, she began to plead, but I was done listening. Goodbye, I said and hung up the phone, then promptly blocked her contact. I moved forward with the divorce proceedings through a lawyer, demanding compensation not just from my ex-husband Peter, but also from Nancy. I sought child support and reimbursement for the funds Peter had frivolously spent on my credit card. Nancy's spouse served her with divorce papers, as she was now facing debt from the compensation payments. Eventually, I've heard, they had to force her to leave their house. She tried to depend on her family, but that didn't work out, so she had to start working nights to make ends meet. Peter's relationship quickly collapsed as a result of his desire to rely on Nancy and his subsequent accusation of being the cause of it. After they split up, he had a protracted unemployed period and had to work many part-time jobs to make ends meet. I am ready to pursue the court order if he ever defaults on the child support or restitution. Stephen and I, meanwhile, are thriving in our new surroundings. He is maturing rapidly, flourishing in a loving household free from the pain of the past. My main goal is to keep giving him a loving environment and protect him from any more emotional upheaval.
I stood in the middle of the kitchen, the cold tile beneath my feet feeling like ice against my skin. Anna, did you even hear me? Mrs. Thompson's voice was sharp, a knife slicing through the tense air. I turned, meeting her stern gaze. I heard you, Mrs. Thompson. You want fish for dinner. And not just any fish, she insisted, her eyes narrowing. Get tuna, the fresh kind. Lily loves it. As if on cue, Lily, my 16-year-old stepdaughter, strutted into the kitchen, her phone glued to her ear. She barely acknowledged my presence, her eyes rolling dramatically. Fish again? I want a burger. Go get me one, Anna. The demands weren't new, but they stung each time. I was more a servant than a family member in this house. A deep breath steadied my voice, but I'm already preparing dinner. Lily cut me off. So I want a burger. Can't you do that one little thing for me? Mrs. Thompson chimed in, her voice laced with feigned concern. She's just a kid who wants a burger, Anna. It's not about being stingy. The word stingy hung in the air, a label I'd become too familiar with in this household. They had no idea about the financial tightrope we were walking on. My job in administration barely covered the essentials, and Michael's sporadic earnings as a struggling writer added little. Fine, I'll get the burger, I muttered, feeling a familiar knot of frustration in my stomach. As I turned to leave, Lily's voice stopped me. And I need $100. I spun around, disbelief written across my face. $100? For what? There's this new game everyone has. I need it. I looked towards Mrs. Thompson, hoping for some semblance of reason. Instead, she nodded in agreement. Poor thing. She needs to fit in with her friends. Give her the money, Anna? But this month's budget is already stretched thin, I protested weakly. Mrs. Thompson's expression hardened. Are you suggesting we're not entitled to Michael's royalties? What kind of stepmother are you? A stepmother trying to keep us afloat, I wanted to say. But the words never came. Instead, I reached for my purse, the weight of their expectations heavier than the coins and notes it contained. The evening air was crisp as I returned from the store, bags weighing down my arms. Inside them, a symbol of my surrender, a tuna and a burger. As I entered the house, the scent of disdain was more pungent than the food's aroma. Finally, Lily scoffed, snatching the bag with the burger. Took you long enough? I set the tuna on the kitchen counter, meeting Mrs. Thompson's scrutinizing gaze. Here's the fish, Mrs. Thompson. She inspected it with a frown. It could be fresher. Next time, put in more effort, Anna. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. Michael was in his study, probably lost in his world of make-believe literary fame. I longed for him to see the reality, our dwindling savings, the mounting bills, and his family's insatiable demands. Later that night I lay in bed, the moon casting shadows across the room. Michael's voice broke the silence. Anna, you seem distant lately. Is everything okay? I turned to face him, the moonlight revealing his oblivious expression. It's just your family and our finances. It's overwhelming. He brushed off my concerns with a wave of his hand. Don't worry about money. Writers don't. It stifles creativity. And my family, well, they're just set in their ways. But Michael, the reality is... I started, but he interrupted. Reality is subjective. In my world, my next novel will be a bestseller. You'll see. I wanted to scream, to shake him into seeing the truth. But I bit my tongue, a tear escaping down my cheek. I turned away, the unsaid words festering in my heart. The next morning, Lily's taunts and Mrs. Thompson's criticisms resumed. As I prepared breakfast, I overheard Lily talking to her friend on the phone. She's so pathetic, pretending to be our mom. I wish Dad would just divorce her already. The words pierced through me like icy daggers. I wanted to confront her, to defend myself, but I remained silent, my hands trembling as I poured the coffee. At work, my colleague Jane noticed my forlorn expression. Anna, you okay? You've seemed off lately. I sighed, the dam of my emotions ready to burst. It's just home stuff, you know how it is. Jane leaned in, her voice a whisper. If it's that bad, maybe it's time to think about yourself. You deserve happiness too, you know. Just her words echoed in my mind all day. Happiness, a distant dream smothered by the burden of illusions I was living under. The world outside was bathed in a soft, golden hue of the setting sun, but inside, the walls of the house felt like they were closing in on me. It had been another day of juggling insults and managing the impossible demands of my stepfamily. As I entered the living room, the sight that greeted me stopped me dead in my tracks. Half of the furniture was gone. The room, once cluttered with Mrs. Thompson's countless knickknacks and Lily's gadgets, was now eerily empty. A cold dread settled in my stomach. I reached for my phone, dialing Michael's number. It rang and rang, until finally his voice came through, distant and cold. Anna, you noticed, huh? What's going on, Michael? Where is everything? His laugh was hollow. We've moved, Anna, to a high-rise condo. A fresh start, you know? My heart pounded in my chest. A fresh start? Without me? You can join us if you want, but you'll need to apologize first. Apologize? For what? Keeping us from bankruptcy? For enduring their endless ridicule? In the background, I could hear Lily's voice, laced with malice. She finally realized she's not wanted. Good riddance. Mrs. Thompson's voice joined the chorus. Michael deserves better. Someone who appreciates his talent. Their words were like venom, and with each syllable, the last threads of my attachment to this family frayed and snapped. Michael, I said, my voice steady, I won't be joining you. I hope you find what you're looking for in your new condo. There was a pause, and then a scoff. How noble of you, Anna. The call ended, leaving me in a silence that was both suffocating and liberating. The next few days were a blur. I packed my belongings, each item a reminder of a life filled with false hopes and unreciprocated love. The divorce papers arrived soon after, with Michael's signature scrawled across them. As I signed them, a sense of freedom washed over me. This was the point of no return. I was leaving behind the life of a woman scorned and stepping into a future where my worth wasn't tied to the whims of a family that never saw me as one of their own. I left the house for the last time, the divorce papers in my bag. The world outside seemed different now, brighter, full of possibilities. I was no longer Anna, the unwanted stepmother. I was just Anna, and that was enough. The first morning in my new apartment greeted me with a quiet that was both unfamiliar and comforting. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow on the sparse yet cozy space I now called home. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. Sitting at my small dining table, I sipped my coffee and reflected on the whirlwind of changes. I had left behind the toxic environment of my previous life, and, with it, the shadows that had clung to my spirit. Now it was just me, my thoughts, and the blank pages of a notebook that lay open in front of me. Writing had always been a secret passion of mine, a hidden outlet for my emotions. But in the chaos of my life with Michael and his family, it had been pushed aside, forgotten. Now the words flowed effortlessly, as if they had been waiting just beneath the surface, eager to be released. As days turned into weeks, I found solace in my newfound freedom and the routine I had established. My job in administration, once a source of stress, now felt manageable. even enjoyable. But it was in the evenings, when I returned to my writing, that I felt truly alive. I wrote about everything, my feelings, my experiences, and even fictional stories that mirrored the journey I had been on. Each word was a step away from my past and a step towards rediscovering who I was. It wasn't long before I decided to take a leap of faith. I submitted some of my work to various publications and writing contests. To my surprise and delight, the response was overwhelmingly positive. My stories resonated with readers, and I began to receive offers for freelance writing jobs. One evening, as I was finishing up a piece, my phone rang. It was Jane, my colleague. "Anna, you won't believe it. Your story won first place in the local writing competition. They loved it." I was speechless. This was more than just a win. It was validation of my talent and my journey. As weeks turned into months, my life settled into a pleasant rhythm. I was no longer just surviving. I was thriving. My relationship with Michael and his family became a distant memory, a chapter of my life that was closed and tucked away. But life has a way of bringing the past back, just when you think you've moved on. It was on a crisp autumn day that I received a call from Michael. His voice, once so familiar, now sounded like a distant echo from another life. "Anna, we need to talk." I hesitated for a moment, the old wounds still tender. But I was not the same woman he had left behind. I was stronger, more resilient. "All right, Michael, let's talk." The coffee shop was bustling with the late afternoon crowd, but the noise faded into the background as I saw Michael sitting at a corner table. He looked older, warier, a shadow of the man I once knew. "Anna, thank you for meeting me," he said, his voice tinged with a desperation I hadn't heard before. I sat down, keeping my expression neutral. "What did you want to talk about, Michael?" He hesitated, fidgeting with his coffee cup. "It's about the condo and everything, really. We're in trouble, Anna." I listened, my heart void of the sympathy I once would have felt. Michael spoke of financial woes, the high-rise dream turning into a nightmare of debts and disillusionment. Lily and Mrs. Thompson, once so demanding, were now facing the harsh reality of their situation. I thought my writing would save us, but... Michael's voice trailed off, his eyes not meeting mine. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who had dismissed my concerns about money was now drowning in the very thing he had ignored. "Michael, I'm sorry to hear that, but why tell me this? We're divorced. Your financial problems aren't mine anymore." He looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "I was hoping maybe you could help us, just until I get back on my feet." The request was absurd, almost laughable. "Help you? After everything that's happened?" Michael leaned in, his voice low. "You were always good with money, Anna, and you've always been kind-hearted." Kind-hearted. The term felt like a slap. I had been kind-hearted, and it had been taken for granted, exploited. "Michael, I've moved on. I have my own life now, my own expenses. I can't help you." His face fell, the reality of my words sinking in. "I see. I just thought." "What did you think, Michael? That I'd come running back to fix the mess you've created?" He didn't respond, the silence between us growing heavier by the second. Finally, I stood up. "I wish you the best, Michael. I truly do, but your life is no longer my concern." As I walked away, leaving Michael in the coffee shop, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was the final closure I needed. The last remnants of a life I no longer belonged to had been shed. The crisp autumn air was a refreshing contrast to the warmth of my apartment. As I sat at my desk, the glow of the computer screen illuminated the room. It had been a few months since my last encounter with Michael, and life had settled into a comforting rhythm of work and writing. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a call from Jane. "Anna, you won't believe this. Your novel is being considered for a movie adaptation." I was stunned. My novel, born from the pain and turmoil of my past, had not only resonated with readers, but had also caught the attention of a film producer. It felt surreal, like a dream I was afraid to wake up from. "Are you serious, Jane? That's incredible." Her excitement mirrored mine. "I told you, Anna, you're a fantastic writer. This is just the beginning." As I ended the call, a profound sense of accomplishment washed over me. My journey, with all its hardships, had led me to this moment. In the weeks that followed, negotiations for the movie adaptation progressed rapidly. My novel, which detailed the struggles of a woman finding her strength amidst adversity, was going to be on the big screen. One evening, as I was reflecting on these developments, a news alert popped up on my phone. It was about Michael. Curiosity piqued. I clicked on the link. The article detailed Michael's latest misfortune. His attempts at writing had finally come to a futile end. Publishers had lost interest, citing his lack of originality and poor sales. To add to his woes, his high-rise dream had crumbled. Unable to keep up with the rent and mounting debts, he and his family had been forced to move out. I read the article with a mix of emotions. There was no joy in seeing someone's life unravel, but there was a sense of poetic justice. Michael and his family, who had once looked down on me, were now facing the consequences of their actions and choices. As I turned off my phone, I realized that this was the true essence of karma. It wasn't about revenge or seeing others suffer. It was about the natural balance of life where actions and choices inevitably shaped one's destiny. I turned back to my writing, the words flowing freely. My experiences had taught me that strength comes from within, and that resilience is born from adversity. And now I was sharing those lessons with the world. My past with Michael and his family was a closed chapter, but it had given me the greatest gift, the realization of my own potential and the courage to pursue my dreams. As the moon cast a gentle light through my window, I smiled to myself. Life was unpredictable, filled with ups and downs, but I was ready for whatever came next. I had found my voice, my purpose, and no one could take that away from me. The sound of shattering glass jolted me from my daydream. I stared at the broken vase on the marble floor, water and lilies scattered around my feet. My hands trembled as I bent to clean up the mess, my mind racing with the conversation I'd overheard just moments ago. "Rodney, darling," I'd cooed into the phone earlier. "I was thinking we could have a nice dinner tonight. I'll make your favorite." "Not tonight, Jenna." He'd cut me off. His voice clipped. "I've got a late meeting. Don't wait up." I'd frowned, about to protest when I heard a woman's muffled laughter in the background. My blood ran cold as Rodney quickly ended the call. Now, as I swept up the broken pieces of porcelain, I couldn't shake the sinking feeling in my gut. After giving up my high-powered career to be the perfect wife Rodney wanted, was this how he repaid me? The doorbell rang, startling me from my spiraling thoughts. I wiped my hands on my apron and hurried to answer it. "Mom?" I blinked in surprise at the sight of my mother, Amelia, standing on the porch. She raised an eyebrow. "Well, aren't you going to invite me in?" I stepped aside, allowing her to sweep past me into the foyer. Her sharp eyes took in the shattered vase and my disheveled appearance. "What's wrong, Jenna?" she asked, her tone softening. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I hesitated, unsure how to voice my suspicions. It's Rodney," I finally managed. "I think he might be—" The words caught in my throat, but Mom's eyes narrowed in understanding. "Cheating?" she finished for me. I nodded, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Mom's lips thinned into a hard line. "That bastard," she muttered. "I never liked him, you know. Always thought he was too slick for his own good." "Mom," I protested weakly, "we don't know for sure." "Oh, please," she scoffed. "A woman knows these things, Jenna. You're not stupid. What did you hear?" I recounted the phone call, my suspicions growing with each word. Mom listened intently, her expression darkening. "Well," she said when I finished, "there's only one thing to do now." "What's that?" I asked, dreading her answer. "We catch him red-handed," she declared, a glint of determination in her eye. "No son-in-law of mine is going to make a fool of my daughter." I felt a flicker of hope at her words. "But how?" Mom's smile was positively wicked. "Leave that to me, dear. I didn't spend 40 years married to your father without learning a thing or two about men and their indiscretions." Just then my phone buzzed with a text from Rodney. "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up." I showed it to Mom, my heart sinking. She read it quickly, then looked up at me with fire in her eyes. "Perfect," she said. "We start tonight." As we began to plot, I felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. Was I really ready to uncover the truth about my marriage? And if Rodney was cheating, what would I do? The sound of a car pulling into the driveway interrupted our scheming. Mom and I exchanged a panicked look. "Rodney's home early," I whispered. Mom squeezed my hand. "Remember, act natural. We'll figure this out together." As the key turned in the lock, I took a deep breath and plastered on a smile. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. My life was about to change forever. I drummed my fingers on the steering wheel. My nerves frayed as I pulled into the parking lot of Hawkeye Investigations. The neon sign flickered ominously in the twilight, matching the churning in my stomach. "You're doing the right thing, Jenna," I muttered to myself, gathering the courage to step out of the car. The bell above the door jingled as I entered the dingy office. A grizzled man with a 5 o'clock shadow looked up from his desk, eyeing me warily. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I swallowed hard. I need to hire a private investigator." He gestured to the chair across from him. As I sat, he introduced himself as Frank Hawkins. "So what seems to be the problem?" he asked, leaning back in his creaky chair. I took a deep breath. "I think my husband is cheating on me." Frank's expression didn't change as he pulled out a notepad. "Tell me everything." As I recounted the suspicious phone calls, late nights at the office, and the woman's laughter I'd overheard, Frank jotted down notes. When I finished, he looked up at me with a grim expression. "I'll take the case, Mrs. Lane, but I have to warn you, you might not like what I find." I nodded, my throat tight. I need to know the truth. After discussing rates and logistics, I left the office feeling both relieved and terrified. As I drove home, my phone buzzed with a text from Rodney. "Great news. Found the perfect house. Can't wait to show you tomorrow." My heart sank. How could he be planning our future while potentially destroying our marriage? The next day, Rodney practically bounced with excitement as we pulled up to a charming 2-story home in an up-and-coming neighborhood. "What do you think?" he asked, grinning like a schoolboy. I forced a smile. "It's lovely, dear." As we toured the house, Rodney rattled off its features: gleaming hardwood floors, a gourmet kitchen, a spacious master suite. But all I could think about was whether he planned to bring his mistress here. "We could start a family in this house," Rodney said softly, wrapping his arms around me from behind. I stiffened, guilt and anger warring inside me. "About that," I began, turning to face him. "I think we should see a fertility specialist before we make any big decisions." Rodney's brow furrowed. "Why? We're both young and healthy." It's been a while, and nothing's happened," I explained, hating the lie but needing answers. "I want to make sure everything's okay." He hesitated, then nodded. "All right, if it'll make you feel better." As we left the house, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Frank. "Got some preliminary info. Meet tomorrow?" My stomach clenched. "Everything okay?" Rodney asked, noticing my expression. I plastered on a smile. "Just Mom checking in. So about this house." We spent the drive home discussing finances, with Rodney assuring me we could afford it with the savings I'd been squirreling away. Little did he know, those savings might soon become my lifeline. That night, as Rodney slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake, my mind racing. What would Frank's investigation reveal? And if Rodney was cheating, could I really go through with buying this house, knowing our marriage was built on lies? Just before dawn, I made a decision. I'd go through with the house purchase. It was a solid investment, affair or no affair. But I'd also start preparing for the worst. As the first rays of sunlight peeked through the curtains, I slipped out of bed and headed to the home office. It was time to dust off my old resume and see what opportunities might be out there for an ex-corporate powerhouse turned housewife. Whatever happened next, I'd be ready. Rodney Lane might think he held all the cards, but he was about to learn that his perfect little housewife had a few tricks up her sleeve. The sterile smell of the fertility clinic made my stomach churn as Rodney and I sat in uncomfortable silence, waiting for Dr. Patel to return with our test results. I glanced at Rodney, noticing the sheen of sweat on his forehead. Was it nerves about the results or guilt over his suspected affair? "Mr. and Mrs. Lane?" Dr. Patel's voice startled us both. She entered, a somber expression on her face. My heart plummeted. "I'm afraid I have some difficult news," she began, her voice gentle. "Based on our tests, it appears that conceiving naturally will be extremely challenging for you." I felt the air leave my lungs. Despite my suspicions about Rodney, a part of me had still dreamed of having a family with him. "What's the issue?" Rodney asked, his voice strained. Dr. Patel hesitated, then looked directly at Rodney. "The problem lies with you, Mr. Lane. Your sperm count is extremely low and motility is poor. It's highly unlikely you'll be able to father children without significant medical intervention." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Rodney's face crumple, a mix of shock and devastation etched into every line. For a moment, I forgot about my anger and suspicion, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "There are options," Dr. Rao Patel continued, outlining various fertility treatments and their success rates. But I barely heard her. My mind was racing. If Rodney couldn't father children, then how? "We'll need some time to process this," I heard myself say, standing abruptly. "Thank you, doctor." The drive home was tense, Rodney gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. When we finally pulled into our driveway, he turned to me, his eyes red-rimmed. "Jenna, I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I know how much you wanted children." I swallowed hard, torn between comforting him and confronting him. "It's not your fault, Rodney. These things happen." He nodded, then surprised me by pulling me into a fierce hug. "I love you," he murmured into my hair. "We'll get through this together." For a moment, I let myself believe him, but as we entered the house, reality came crashing back. The private investigator's preliminary report, the suspicious phone calls, the late nights at the office, it all pointed to an affair. And now, with this new information, "I need some air," I mumbled, heading for the back porch. Once outside, I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and dialed my mother. "Mom?" I whispered when she answered. "I need you." An hour later, I sat at my mother's kitchen table, a cup of tea growing cold in front of me, as I recounted everything. The fertility clinic results, my suspicions about Rodney's affair, and the gnawing fear that had taken root in my gut. "Oh, sweetheart," Mom sighed, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "I'm so sorry you're going through this." "What do I do, Mom?" I asked, feeling lost. "If Rodney can't have children and he's having an affair." Mom's eyes narrowed. "You think this other woman might be pregnant?" The possibility hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. I nodded, unable to voice the fear aloud. "Listen to me, Jenna," Mom said, her voice firm. "You need to get all the facts before you do anything rash. Wait for the full report from the investigator. And in the meantime, keep your eyes and ears open." I nodded, feeling a renewed sense of determination. "You're right. I need to be smart about this." As I drove home that evening, my mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. I'd play the role of the supportive wife, comforting Rodney through this fertility crisis. But behind the scenes, I'd be gathering evidence, preparing for whatever bombshell might be coming my way. Pulling into the driveway, I noticed Rodney's car was gone. A text message blinked on my phone. "Working late, don't wait up." I smiled grimly. Game on, Rodney. Game on. The manila envelope sat on my kitchen table like a ticking time bomb. Frank Hawkins had called earlier, his gruff voice tinged with sympathy. "Got the full report, Mrs. Lane. It's, well, you should see for yourself." My hands trembled as I reached for the envelope. Taking a deep breath, I pulled out the contents, a stack of photos and a detailed written report. My heart pounded as I flipped through the images. Rodney, arm around a young blonde woman outside a cozy Italian restaurant. Rodney and the same woman kissing passionately in a park. Rodney helping her into his car, his hand lingering on her lower back. I felt bile rise in my throat as I scanned the report. The woman's name was Carla Thompson, 28 years old, a junior executive at Rodney's company. They'd been meeting regularly for months, often during late nights at the office or business trips. The world spun around me as the full weight of Rodney's betrayal crashed down. I stumbled to the bathroom, barely making it before I emptied the contents of my stomach. As I rinsed my mouth, I caught sight of my reflection. Pale, shaken, eyes brimming with unshed tears. "No," I said firmly to my reflection. "You will not break for him." I marched back to the kitchen, snatching up my phone to call Mom. She answered on the first ring. "It's true," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. The investigator confirmed everything. Mom's sharp intake of breath crackled through the line. "Oh, Jenna, I'm so sorry, sweetheart. What are you going to do?" I paused, considering. "I'm going to divorce him, Mom, but first, I need to be smart about this." We talked strategy for the next hour. By the time we hung up, I had a plan forming. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from Rodney. "Heading out for a business trip. Back in 3 days. Love you?" I snorted. Business trip, indeed. More like a romantic getaway with his mistress. But this time, his lie was exactly what I needed. Over the next 3 days, I was a whirlwind of activity. I contacted a divorce lawyer, gathering all our financial documents. I reached out to old colleagues, subtly putting out feelers for job opportunities, and I started packing, carefully selecting the items that meant the most to me. On the third day, as I was sorting through some old photos, I came across our wedding album. Tears pricked my eyes as I flipped through the pages, remembering the hope and love I'd felt that day. How could Rodney throw all of this away? The sound of a car in the driveway jolted me from my reverie. Rodney was home early. Panic surged through me as I scrambled to hide the evidence of my plans. "Jenna?" Rodney called as he entered the house. "I'm home." I plastered on a smile and went to greet him. "Welcome back, honey. How was your trip?" Rodney's eyes darted away guiltily. "Oh, same old boring meetings." As he rambled on about fictitious client dinners, I studied him. The man I'd loved, the man I'd given up my career for, he was a stranger to me now. "Actually, Rodney," I interrupted, my heart pounding. "We need to talk." He frowned, noticing my serious tone. "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation to come. "I know about Carla," I said quietly. Rodney's face drained of color. "Jenna, I can explain," but I held up a hand, silencing him. "Save it. I want a divorce." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with finality. As I watched shock and panic flicker across Rodney's face, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The worst had happened, and I was still standing. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it head on. My hands shook as I smoothed down my blazer, staring at my reflection in the mirror. It had been years since I'd worn anything but comfortable housewife attire. The woman looking back at me was a stranger, determined, fierce, ready to reclaim her life. "You've got this, Jenna," I whispered to myself, grabbing my portfolio and heading out the door. The small accounting firm, Greenwood and Associates, was a far cry from my former corporate glory days. But it was a start. As I sat in the waiting room, my mind raced with a mixture of excitement and terror. Could I really do this? Jump back into the workforce after years of being a housewife? "Mrs. Lane?" A kind-faced woman appeared. "Mr. Greenwood will see you now." The interview was a blur of questions about my past experience, my skills, and the gap in my resume. I explained my situation as diplomatically as possible, leaving out the sordid details of Rodney's betrayal. "Well, Mrs. Lane," Mr. Greenwood said, leaning back in his chair, "your experience is impressive, but I'll be honest, that gap in your employment is concerning." My heart sank, but I refused to give up. "Mr. Greenwood, I understand your concern, but I can assure you my skills haven't diminished. In fact, managing a household budget and investments has only sharpened my financial acumen. Give me a chance, and I'll prove my worth." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, Mrs. Lane, we'll start you on a probationary period. Welcome to the team." Relief and joy washed over me as I shook his hand. "Thank you, sir. You won't regret this." As I left the office, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Rodney. "Where are you? We need to talk about the divorce." Reality came crashing back. I had a job now, but I was still married to a cheater, still living in our shared home. It was time to make my final move. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with plans. When I arrived, Rodney was waiting, his face a mask of false contrition. "Jenna, please," he began. "Can't we work this out? I made a mistake, but I love you." I held up a hand, silencing him. "Save it, Rodney. I'm done listening to your lies." His expression hardened. "Fine. If that's how you want to play it, we'll let the lawyers handle everything. But don't expect to get much in the settlement. You haven't worked in years, remember?" A small, satisfied smile played at my lips. "Actually, Rodney, I just got a job. And as for the settlement, I think you'll find I'm entitled to quite a bit." The color drained from his face. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the savings I've been managing, the investments I've made. Oh, and let's not forget about our new house. I think I'll be keeping that." Rodney sputtered, his composure cracking. "You can't do this." "Watch me," I said, my voice steel. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some packing to do." I brushed past him, heading upstairs to our bedroom. As I pulled out my suitcases, a strange mix of emotions washed over me. Grief for the life I was leaving behind, excitement for the future ahead, and a burning desire for justice. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother. "How did it go, sweetheart?" I took a deep breath, looking around the room that had been my prison for so long. "It's done, Mom. I got the job and I'm leaving Rodney tonight." There was a pause, then Mom's voice came through, filled with pride and determination. "That's my girl. I'm on my way to help you pack. It's time to start your new life, Jenna." As I hung up, I caught sight of myself in the mirror again. This time, I recognized the woman staring back at me. Strong, resilient, ready to face whatever came next. Let Rodney have his affair. I had a whole new life waiting for me, and I was ready to seize it with both hands. The front door slammed open, jolting me from my packing. Rodney's voice boomed through the house. "Jenna, where are you?" I froze, my heart pounding. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I was meant to be gone before he returned from his business trip. Steeling myself, I descended the stairs. The sight that greeted me in the living room knocked the wind out of me. Rodney stood there, his arm wrapped possessively around a young blonde woman. Carla, I presumed. Her hand rested on a slightly swollen belly. "Well, well," Rodney sneered. "Looks like the little housewife is trying to run away." I straightened my spine, refusing to be intimidated. "I'm not running, Rodney. I'm leaving. There's a difference." Carla giggled, the sound grating on my nerves. "Oh, honey," she cooed. "Did you really think you could just walk away after everything Rodney's done for you?" Rage bubbled up inside me. "Everything he's done for me? You mean like cheating on me? Lying to me? Making me give up my career?" Rodney's face darkened. "That's enough, Jenna. We're here to settle this like adults. I want a divorce." The words hung in the air, even though I'd been expecting them. "Fine," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Let's talk terms." Rodney's lips curled into a smug smile. "It's simple. You'll get a modest alimony. After all, I've been the breadwinner all these years. You should be grateful for anything you get." I bit back a laugh. If only he knew. "Oh, and one more thing," Carla chimed in, her hand caressing her belly. "We'll be needing the house. For the baby, you understand." The room spun around me. A baby. The one thing Rodney and I could never have. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. "You can't be serious," I whispered. Rodney shrugged. "It is what it is, Jenna. Carla and I are starting a family. You had your chance." Something inside me snapped. Years of pent-up frustration, anger, and hurt came pouring out. "My chance? You mean in the years I spent supporting you, managing our home, investing our money? The career I gave up because you insisted on having a traditional wife? And now you waltz in here with your pregnant mistress and expect me to just roll over?" Rodney's face flushed with anger. "Watch it, Jenna. Remember who holds the purse strings here." I laughed then, a sharp, bitter sound. "Oh, Rodney, you have no idea, do you?" Confusion flickered across his face. "What are you talking about?" I took a deep breath, savoring the moment. "I'm talking about the fact that I've been managing our finances for years. Those investments you never bothered to look at, they've tripled in value. That little savings account, it's not so little anymore." Rodney's jaw dropped. Carla looked between us, her smug expression faltering. "And as for the house," I continued, "I think you'll find that I'm entitled to half of everything, including that. So no, you won't be moving your little mistress in here." "You're bluffing," Rodney sputtered. I smiled, feeling a surge of power. "Am I? Why don't we let the lawyers sort it out? I'm sure they'll be very interested in how you've been misappropriating company funds to finance your affair." The color drained from Rodney's face. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me," I said, my voice steel. For a moment we stood there, the air crackling with tension. Then Rodney grabbed Carla's arm. "We're leaving. This isn't over, Jenna." As the door slammed behind them, I sank onto the couch, my legs shaking. I'd done it. I'd stood up to Rodney, to Carla, to the life that had been suffocating me for years. But as the adrenaline faded, fear crept in. Rodney wouldn't go down without a fight. And now, with the baby on the way, the stakes were higher than ever. I reached for my phone, dialing my mother's number. "Mom," I said when she answered, my voice breaking. "I need your help. It's time to finish this." The conference room felt suffocating as I sat across from Rodney and his shark of a lawyer. My own attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Gloria, sat beside me, her presence a comforting anchor in the storm. "Let's get this over with," Rodney growled, his eyes never meeting mine. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the battle ahead. "Fine. Let's talk about the house first." Rodney's lawyer leaned forward, a predatory gleam in his eye. "Mr. Lane is willing to be generous. He'll allow you to stay in the house for 6 months. Get back on your feet." I couldn't help but laugh, the sound brittle and harsh. get back on my feet. That's rich coming from you, Rodney. Tell me, how's Carla enjoying my home? Rodney's face flushed red. Leave her out of this. Gentlemen, Gloria interjected smoothly. Let's focus on the facts. The house was purchased with joint funds, and Mrs. Lane has been managing the household finances. She's entitled to her fair share. Rodney's lawyer scoffed. Fair share? She hasn't worked in years. What could she possibly contribute? I felt a surge of anger, but Gloria's hand on my arm kept me grounded. Actually, she said, sliding a folder across the table, Mrs. Lane has been quite busy. These are records of all the investments and savings she's managed over the years. The room fell silent as Rodney and his lawyer pored over the documents. I watched Rodney's face pale as he realized just how much I'd been doing behind the scenes. This can't be right, he stammered. Oh, it's right, I said, my voice steady. And there's more. I want the house, Rodney, not just for 6 months, for good. His head snapped up, eyes blazing. You can't be serious. What about Carla? The baby? The mention of their child sent a sharp pain through my heart. But I pushed it aside. Your infidelity and your new family are not my concern. I've spent years investing in our future, and I'm not walking away with nothing. Rodney's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but Rodney waved him off. He spat. Take the damn house, but don't think you're getting anything else. I exchanged a glance with Gloria, who nodded encouragingly. Actually, Rodney, there's one more thing. I want half of everything, including your company stocks. The color drained from Rodney's face. You can't touch those. They're in my name. Gloria cleared her throat. Actually, Mr. Lane, given the length of your marriage and Mrs. Lane's contributions to the household, she's entitled to an equitable distribution of all marital assets, including your stocks. Rodney leapt to his feet, his chair clattering to the floor. This is insane. I won't let you ruin me. I stood slowly, meeting his gaze. Ruin you? Like you ruined our marriage? Our future? Face it, Rodney. You underestimated me, and now you're paying the price. For a moment, I thought he might lunge across the table at me, but then something in his eyes changed. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a cold, calculating look that sent chills down my spine. You want to play hardball, Jenna? Fine, but remember, I know things about you, too. Things that could make your life very difficult. My heart raced, but I refused to show fear. Is that a threat, Rodney? He smiled, a cruel twist of his lips. Let's call it a promise. You push me too far, and I'll make sure you regret it. As Rodney stormed out of the room, his lawyer scrambling to follow, I sank back into my chair, suddenly exhausted. Gloria squeezed my shoulder reassuringly. You did well, Jenna. But this isn't over yet. Are you ready for what comes next? I closed my eyes, thinking of everything I'd been through, everything still to come. When I opened them again, I felt a new resolve stealing my spine. I'm ready, I said. Whatever Rodney throws at me, I can handle it. It's time to finish this, once and for all. The doorbell rang, its chime echoing through the empty house. I took a deep breath, smoothing down my blazer before opening the door. Rodney stood there, a shadow of the man I once loved, his face haggard and eyes bloodshot. Come to beg for the house back? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He pushed past me, stumbling into the foyer. You ruined me, Jenna. Are you happy now? I closed the door, turning to face him. Ruined you? What are you talking about? Rodney laughed bitterly. Don't play dumb. The company demoted me, sent me to some backwater regional office, all because of your little stunt with the divorce proceedings. A pang of guilt hit me, but I pushed it aside. I didn't do anything except stand up for myself, Rodney. Your choices led you here. He whirled on me, eyes blazing. My choices? What about yours? You were supposed to be a wife, not some corporate shark. The old Jenna might have flinched at his words, but not anymore. I was both, Rodney. I managed our home and our finances. I made smart investments while you were busy with your affair. Don't blame me for your failings. Rodney's face crumpled. How did you do it? How did you outsmart me? I sighed, suddenly feeling very tired. It wasn't about outsmarting you, Rodney. I just paid attention. I learned. I planned for our future while you planned for a different future, didn't you? He sank onto the stairs, head in his hands. What am I supposed to do now? Carla left me. The baby. It wasn't even mine. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. All this pain, all this betrayal, for a lie. I'm sorry, Rodney, but that's not my problem anymore. He looked up at me, eyes pleading. Can't we start over? I made a mistake, but we had something good once, didn't we? For a moment I saw a flicker of the man I'd married, but then I remembered the lies, the betrayal, the years of putting my dreams on hold. No, Rodney, we can't go back. It's time for both of us to move forward. I reached into my pocket, pulling out an envelope. Here, this is the profit from selling the house. Half of it is yours, as we agreed. Rodney stared at the envelope, then back at me. You sold the house? But I never wanted the house, Rodney. I wanted what it represented, our future, but that future is gone now. It's time for a new one. He took the envelope with trembling hands. What will you do now? I smiled, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. I'm going to live, Rodney. I've got a new job, new goals. I'm going to be the woman I always wanted to be, not just someone's wife. Rodney stood slowly, looking around the empty house one last time. I really messed up, didn't I? We both did, I said softly, but it's not too late to start over, for either of us. As I watched Rodney walk out of the house, out of my life, for the last time I felt a mix of sadness and exhilaration. The past few months had been a whirlwind of pain, anger, and revelation. But standing there in the empty foyer of the house we once shared, I realized something profound. I was free. Free from the lies, the expectations, the stifling role I'd forced myself into. Free to be Jenna Lane, not just Mrs. Rodney Lane. My phone buzzed, a text from Mom. All packed and ready? You sure about this? I smiled, typing back a quick response. Absolutely. Time for a new adventure. As I locked the door behind me, I took one last look at the house. It had been the stage for so much drama, so much heartache. But it had also been the crucible that forged me into the woman I was now, stronger, wiser, and ready to take on the world. I climbed into my packed car, the open road stretching out before me. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, that uncertainty felt thrilling rather than terrifying. Goodbye, Rodney, I whispered, putting the car in drive. Hello, life. As I pulled away from the curb, I felt a surge of excitement. The road ahead might be bumpy, but I was ready for whatever came next. After all, I was Jenna Lane, survivor, fighter, and architect of my own destiny, and my story was just beginning. Marrying him might have saved my life, but living with him almost destroyed it. Those haunting words echoed in my mind as I stared at the ornate mirror, the golden frame, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within me. It had all started with a chance encounter at a charity gala, where Alex Preston's charming smile and captivating presence had swept me off my feet. A whirlwind courtship followed, filled with lavish dates, heartfelt promises, and the assurance that he was the man of my dreams. Little did I know that underneath that polished exterior lurked a web of deceit so tangled that it would almost suffocate me. Eliza, darling, are you ready? Alex's voice drifted through the bedroom door, snapping me back to reality. Just a minute, I called out, forcing a smile onto my face as I smoothed the silky fabric of my dress. As I stepped out, Alex's eyes raked over me appreciatively. You look stunning, my love. He leaned in, planting a kiss on my cheek, his familiar cologne enveloping me. The ride to the Preston family estate was filled with idle chatter, but my mind wandered to the events that had brought me here. Barely 6 months ago, I had been a carefree, independent woman, content with my career and social circle. Then, Alex swept in, spinning tales of undying love and a future filled with happiness. Little did I know that by accepting his proposal, I was stepping into a gilded cage. The estate loomed before us, its imposing architecture a testament to the family's wealth and prestige. As we entered, a figure emerged from the shadows, her sharp gaze immediately fixing on me. Vivian, I'd like you to meet my wife, Eliza, Alex said, his voice tinged with pride. Vivian, Alex's older sister, offered a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Welcome to the family, Eliza. In that moment, I sensed an undercurrent of tension, a subtle warning that all was not as it seemed within the walls of this grand estate. As the evening progressed, surrounded by Alex's closest friends and business associates, I found myself drowning in a sea of polite conversations and forced smiles. Vivian's calculating glances only added to my growing unease. It wasn't until later, when the guests had dispersed and Alex had retired for the night, that I allowed myself to confront the nagging doubts that had taken root. Seated in the dimly lit library, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had entered a world far more complex and dangerous than I could have ever imagined. The question was, would I have the strength to untangle myself from this web before it consumed me completely? The grand foyer of the Preston estate should have filled me with awe, but instead, a sense of unease crept over me as I stepped inside my new home. The opulent chandeliers cast a warm glow, yet the atmosphere felt chilly and unwelcoming. "Let me show you around," Alex said, his hand resting possessively on the small of my back as he guided me through the winding corridors. Each room was more extravagant than the last, from the sprawling living area adorned with priceless antiques to the state-of-the-art kitchen that could have belonged in a five-star restaurant. It was a world of wealth and privilege I had never experienced before. "And this will be our bedroom," Alex announced, pushing open a set of double doors to reveal a lavish suite that could have easily accommodated a small palace. As I took in the plush furnishings and the breathtaking view from the floor-to-ceiling windows, a movement in the corner of my eye caught my attention. Vivian stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her gaze piercing. "Impressive, isn't it?" she remarked, her tone laced with sarcasm. "I hope you'll be comfortable here, Eliza." Before I could respond, Alex stepped forward, his demeanor shifting from doting husband to protective brother. "Vivian, I thought we discussed this. Eliza is my wife now, and she deserves to be treated with respect." Vivian's eyes narrowed, and for a moment I could have sworn I saw a flicker of contempt cross her features. "Of course, dear brother, I wouldn't dream of making your precious wife feel unwelcome." With a curt nod, she turned on her heel and disappeared down the hallway, leaving an uncomfortable silence in her wake. "Don't mind her," Alex murmured, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Vivian has always been a little difficult." His touch, once comforting, now felt suffocating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was far more to this sibling rivalry than met the eye. Over the next few weeks, I found myself walking on eggshells, constantly navigating the minefield of tensions that permeated the estate. Vivian's presence was like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over every interaction, her cutting remarks and icy glares leaving me feeling unsettled and unwelcome in my own home. "You shouldn't let her get to you," Alex would say, his reassuring words ringing hollow in the face of Vivian's open hostility. But it wasn't just Vivian's behavior that set my nerves on edge. There were subtle shifts in Alex's demeanor, too. The way he would dismiss my concerns with a wave of his hand, or the way his touch would linger a little too long, as if he were trying to assert his dominance. It was during one of these moments, as he gripped my arm a little too tightly while chastising me for some perceived misstep, that I caught a glimpse of something in his eyes, a flicker of cruelty that sent shivers down my spine. In that instant, I realized that the man I had married was not the charming, loving soul he had pretended to be. There was a darkness lurking beneath the surface, and I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about him. As I lay awake that night, Alex's even breathing beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had somehow become trapped in a gilded cage with no idea how to escape. The sound of raised voices echoed through the study, shattering the usual tranquility of the estate. Curiosity got the better of me as I crept closer, the muffled words becoming clearer. "Can't keep sweeping this under the rug, Alex. The shareholders are getting restless." It was Vivian's voice, sharp and accusatory. My heart raced as I pressed my ear against the door, straining to make out Alex's response. "I have it under control," he snapped, his tone laced with irritation. "The last thing we need is for word to get out about our creative accounting practices." "Creative accounting practices?" My mind whirled as the implications of those words sank in. Could Alex be involved in something illegal? Before I could ponder further, the sound of footsteps approaching sent me scurrying away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I busied myself with straightening the vase on the hallway table, trying to appear nonchalant as Vivian emerged from the study, her face flushed with anger. "Eliza," she said curtly, her gaze sweeping over me with undisguised disdain. "I didn't realize you were lurking about." "I wasn't," I stammered, my palms growing clammy. "I was just passing by." Vivian's eyes narrowed, and for a moment I thought she might call out my lie. But then, Her expression softened ever so slightly, and she leaned in closer. "You should be careful, Eliza," she murmured, her voice low and laced with warning. "There are things happening in this family that you know nothing about." Before I could respond, she had swept past me, leaving me reeling in her wake. What did she mean by that? Was she implying that Alex was involved in something illegal, something that could put our entire family at risk? The questions swirled in my mind, but I knew better than to confront Alex directly. Instead, I bided my time, keeping my eyes and ears open for any clue that might shed light on the shadows that seemed to be closing in around us. It wasn't long before I stumbled upon my first piece of evidence. Late one night, as Alex worked at his desk in the study, I slipped in under the guise of bringing him a nightcap. As I placed the glass on the desk, a folder caught my eye, a collection of financial statements and ledgers, their pages littered with suspicious-looking entries and crossed-out figures. My heart pounded as I glimpsed the words Shell Corporation and offshore accounts scrawled in the margins. I knew then that my suspicions were well-founded. Alex was involved in something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. As the weeks passed, I became a silent observer, gathering what information I could while maintaining a careful facade of ignorance. Whispered conversations, coded emails, and furtive glances all added to the mounting pile of evidence that pointed to one inescapable truth. My husband was a liar and a cheat, and the very foundation of our marriage was built on deceit. Yet even as the walls closed in around us, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope that perhaps I could find a way to untangle this tangled web before it consumed us both. The soft glow of the bedside lamp cast eerie shadows across the room as I pored over the documents scattered on the desk. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, each one revealing a new layer of Alex's deception. Financial statements riddled with discrepancies, emails detailing shady business dealings, and a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. The evidence was damning. And yet, a part of me still clung to the hope that there was some innocent explanation, some misunderstanding that could justify the chaos unfolding before my eyes. It was then that the ping of an incoming message shattered the silence, the sound making me jump. Alex's phone vibrated on the nightstand, the screen illuminating with a new notification. Against my better judgment, I reached for it, my heart pounding in my chest. The message was innocuous at first glance. A simple, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow" from a contact labeled Jessica. But as I scrolled further, my breath caught in my throat. Message after message, each one more explicit than the last, painted a clear picture of Alex's infidelity. "Missing your touch. Counting down the hours until I can hold you again. You know how much I crave you." The words blurred together as hot tears stung my eyes. The man I had trusted, the man I had loved with every fiber of my being, had been deceiving me from the start. His promises of devotion were nothing but hollow lies, his vows of fidelity cast aside with callous disregard. The sound of footsteps in the hallway jolted me back to reality, and I scrambled to gather the scattered documents, my hands shaking uncontrollably. In my haste, I knocked over a picture frame, the shattering glass echoing like a gunshot in the stillness of the night. The bedroom door flew open, and there stood Alex, his face contorted in a mixture of anger and fear. "What the hell are you doing?" he snarled, his eyes landing on the incriminating papers clutched in my trembling hands. My voice faltered as I struggled to form a coherent response, the weight of his betrayal crushing me from all sides. Alex's gaze hardened, and he advanced towards me, his movements slow and deliberate, like a predator closing in on its prey. "You weren't supposed to see those," he hissed, snatching the documents from my grasp. "Alex, please?" I pleaded, my heart pounding in my chest. "Just tell me the truth." For a moment, his expression softened, and I dared to hope that he might offer an explanation, a chance to salvage the shattered remnants of our relationship. But then, his lips twisted into a cruel smile, and the illusion was shattered. "The truth?" he sneered, leaning in close enough for me to smell the whiskey on his breath. "The truth is, you're nothing but a means to an end, Eliza, a pretty little trophy wife to help me maintain appearances while I take care of business." His words cut deep, each one a razor-sharp blade slicing through the fragile threads that had bound us together. In that moment, I knew there was no turning back, no chance for reconciliation. The man I thought I knew was gone, replaced by a monster driven by greed and deceit. "If you breathe a word of this to anyone," Alex continued, his grip tightening around my wrist until I winced in pain, "I'll make sure you regret the day you ever crossed me." As he stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him, I sank to the floor, my body racked with sobs. The world as I knew it had come crashing down around me, leaving me adrift in a sea of lies and broken promises. But even as despair threatened to consume me, a flicker of determination ignited deep within. I would not be a victim, not anymore. It was time to take back control, no matter the cost. The heavy oak door creaked open, and Vivian slipped into the dimly lit library, her eyes scanning the room before settling on me. "Eliza, what's going on?" "Your message sounded urgent." I took a deep breath, steeling my resolve. "I know everything, Vivian, about Alex's illegal activities, his offshore accounts, his mistress." Vivian's expression hardened, and for a moment I thought she might deny it all. But then her shoulders sagged, and she sank into the nearest armchair, defeat etched across her features. "So, he finally showed his true colors," she muttered, her voice laced with bitterness. "I tried to warn you, Eliza, but you were too blinded by his charm to see the monster he really is." "You knew?" I felt a surge of anger rising within me. "You knew what he was up to, and you didn't say anything?" Vivian's gaze met mine, her eyes filled with a mixture of remorse and determination. I had my suspicions, but I could never get my hands on any solid proof. That snake always covered his tracks too well. "Well, now we have the proof," I said, sliding the stack of incriminating documents across the table towards her. "And we're going to use it to bring him down." Vivian's perfectly manicured brows arched in surprise. "We? You want to take over the company, don't you?" I pressed on, my voice gaining strength with each word. "Well, this is our chance. Together, we can expose Alex's misdeeds and get him out of the way for good." A slow smile spread across Vivian's face, and for the first time I saw a glimmer of respect in her eyes. "I have to admit, I underestimated you, Eliza. You've got more fire in you than I gave you credit for." She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "All right, let's do this, but we have to be smart about it. Alex is a snake, and he'll stop at nothing to protect his precious empire." Over the next few days, Vivian and I pored over the evidence, meticulously cataloging every shred of proof, every damning email and suspicious transaction. It was a delicate dance, carefully planning our next moves while maintaining a facade of normalcy around Alex. The tension in the house was palpable, with Alex constantly on edge, his eyes narrowed in suspicion whenever Vivian and I were in the same room. But we played our parts well, acting the dutiful wife and the supportive sister, all the while plotting his downfall. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Vivian asked one night as we finalized our strategy. "Once we set this in motion, there's no going back." I thought of Alex's cruel words, the way he had threatened and belittled me, and a steely resolve settled over me. "I'm ready. He's going to pay for what he's done, one way or another." The day of the board meeting arrived, and Vivian and I took our seats at the long mahogany table, our game faces firmly in place. Alex strode in, his confidence barely masking the undercurrent of tension that rippled through the room. As he launched into his polished presentation, projecting financial figures and growth projections onto the screen behind him, I caught Vivian's eye. A slight nod was all it took, and we made our move. "Actually, Alex," Vivian's voice cut through the air like a knife, "I think we should take a closer look at those numbers." Alex faltered, his bravado slipping for just a moment as Vivian began pulling up document after document, laying bare the truth about his misdeeds. The room erupted into chaos, with board members demanding explanations and lawyers scrambling to take notes. Through it all, Alex maintained a veneer of composure, his eyes darting between Vivian and me with a mixture of fury and disbelief. But as the evidence mounted, as the weight of his lies threatened to crush him, the mask finally slipped. "You'll pay for this, Eliza," he snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "Mark my words, you'll regret the day you crossed me." But as I met his gaze, unflinching, I knew that the power had finally shifted. The tangled web of lies he had woven was unraveling before our very eyes, and there was no escape for the monster at its center. The boardroom descended into chaos as the full extent of Alex's deception was laid bare. Lawyers scribbled furiously, shareholders hurled accusations, and through it all, Alex stood frozen, his face contorted in a mask of fury. "How dare you?" he snarled, rounding on Vivian and me. "You have no idea what you've done." Vivian met his gaze, unflinching. "We know exactly what we've done, dear brother. We've exposed you for the liar and fraud that you are." A vein throbbed in Alex's temple as he struggled to maintain his composure. "This is all a misunderstanding," he insisted, his voice strained. "I can explain." "Save it, Alex," one of the board members snapped. "The evidence is overwhelming. Your underhanded dealings, the offshore accounts, the financial manipulations, it's all right here in black and white." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room, and I could see the panic flickering in Alex's eyes as his carefully constructed facade crumbled around him. "You're making a grave mistake," he warned, his gaze shifting to me. "You'll regret this, Eliza." I squared my shoulders, refusing to be intimidated by his empty threats. "The only mistake was ever trusting you." As security guards moved in to escort him out, Alex lunged forward, his face twisted into an ugly snarl. "You'll pay for this, you little bitch!" Strong arms restrained him, but not before his fist connected with the side of my face, sending stars bursting across my vision. I stumbled backward, clutching my throbbing cheek, as Vivian rushed to my side. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. I nodded, blinking back tears of pain and humiliation. "I'm fine. It's nothing compared to what he deserves." As Alex was dragged from the room, his curses and threats echoing down the hallway, a heavy silence settled over the boardroom. It was finally over. The tangled web of lies that had ensnared us all had been severed, and the monster at its center was exposed for the world to see. In the days and weeks that followed, the fallout from Alex's downfall rippled outward, like shockwaves from a seismic event. Lawsuits were filed, investigations launched, and the once mighty Preston empire teetered on the brink of collapse. Through it all, Vivian remained a steadfast ally, guiding the company through the turbulent waters with a deft hand. Together, we worked tirelessly to salvage what remained, to rebuild the tarnished reputation and restore the trust that Alex had so carelessly squandered. It wasn't easy. There were whispers and pointed stares, accusations and innuendo that threatened to drag us down into the mire of scandal. But we persevered, driven by a shared determination to rise from the ashes and forge a new path forward. As for Alex, his world crumbled around him in spectacular fashion. The once charming, larger-than-life figure was reduced to a mere shadow of his former self, his arrogance replaced by desperation as his allies deserted him one by one. I watched from afar as his lavish lifestyle unraveled, his expensive suits traded for prison jumpsuits, his palatial estate seized by the authorities. It was a fate he had brought upon himself, and yet a part of me still felt a twinge of sadness at the sight of his downfall. But that fleeting moment of pity was quickly overshadowed by a sense of triumph and relief. The nightmare was finally over. The tangled web that had ensnared me was no more, and I was free to reclaim the life that had been stolen from me. As I stood in the doorway of my new apartment, taking in the simple furnishings and the warm sunlight streaming through the windows, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. This was a fresh start, a chance to leave the past behind and forge a new path on my own terms. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. I was no longer a victim, no longer a pawn in someone else's twisted game. I was a survivor, a warrior who had stared down the darkness and emerged victorious. And as I stepped out into the world, head held high, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them with the same unwavering resilience that had carried me through the storm. The headline screamed Alex's downfall, plastered across every newspaper and news channel in the country. Business mogul exposed as fraud, Preston empire crumbles amidst scandal, each headline more sensational than the last. As I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the sordid details of his misdeeds, a part of me still couldn't believe how swiftly everything had unraveled. Just weeks ago, Alex had been the picture of success, a titan of industry with the world at his feet. Now he was a disgraced pariah, his name synonymous with deceit and corruption. The real surprise, however, came in the form of the public's reaction. Instead of sympathy or outrage on his behalf, there was a pervasive sense of schadenfreude, a collective glee at witnessing the fall of a man who had lived so ostentatiously, so arrogantly. He had it coming, one commentator declared on a primetime news program. A man like that, with his penchant for excess and his blatant disregard for the rules, was bound to come crashing down eventually. As the days passed, the avalanche of negative publicity only intensified. Former business associates and allies distanced themselves, scrambling to salvage their own reputations. Even Alex's closest confidants turned on him, offering damning testimonies in exchange for leniency from the authorities. Through it all, Vivian remained a steadfast presence by my side, guiding the company through the turbulent waters with a deft hand. Together, we worked tirelessly to reshape the narrative, to restore the trust and credibility that had been shattered by Alex's actions. It wasn't an easy task. There were skeptics at every turn, those who doubted our ability to rise from the ashes of such a colossal scandal. But Vivian was relentless, her determination fueled by a burning desire to reclaim her family's legacy. This company was built on generations of hard work and integrity, she declared in a press conference, her steely gaze fixed on the cameras. We will not allow one man's greed and hubris to tarnish that. As the legal proceedings unfolded, Alex's once formidable empire crumbled around him. Assets were seized, bank accounts frozen, and his lavish lifestyle reduced to a mere memory. Gone were the designer suits and luxury cars, replaced by the drab uniforms and sterile confines of a prison cell. I caught glimpses of him during the highly publicized trial, his once confident demeanor replaced by a haunted, defeated expression. It was a far cry from the charming, charismatic figure who had once swept me off my feet, and I couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity amidst the overwhelming sense of vindication. But that fleeting moment of empathy was quickly overshadowed by the memories of his cruelty, the way he had manipulated and betrayed me without a shred of remorse. This was the fate he had chosen for himself, and he would have to live with the consequences. As the final gavel fell, sealing Alex's fate with a lengthy prison sentence, a palpable sense of relief washed over me. The nightmare was finally over, the tangled web of lies that had ensnared me severed for good. In the aftermath, Vivian stepped forward to assume the mantle of leadership, her steady hand guiding the company through the turbulent waters of rebranding and restructuring. Under her guidance, the once tarnished empire began to regain its footing, slowly but surely clawing its way back to respectability. As for me, I found solace in the simplicity of my new life. Gone were the lavish trappings and the constant scrutiny that had once been my reality. In their place was a newfound sense of freedom, a chance to start anew without the suffocating weight of Alex's lies and manipulations. It wasn't an easy journey, of course. There were moments of doubt and vulnerability, times when the ghosts of the past threatened to drag me back into the darkness. But each time, I drew strength from the knowledge that I had survived, that I had emerged from the fire stronger and more resilient than ever before. As the months passed, the wounds began to heal, and a newfound sense of clarity took root. I was no longer defined by the trauma of my past, no longer a victim of circumstances beyond my control. I was a survivor, a warrior who had stared down the abyss and emerged victorious. And as I stepped out into the world, head held high, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them with the same unwavering determination that had carried me through the storm. The sun filtered through the sheer curtains, bathing my new apartment in a warm, golden glow. It was a far cry from the opulent grandeur of the Preston estate, but as I sipped my morning coffee, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. This was my sanctuary, my safe haven from the chaos and turmoil of the past. Gone were the lavish trappings and the suffocating weight of expectation. In their place was a simple, uncluttered existence, a life of my own making, free from the tangled web of lies and manipulation that had once threatened to consume me. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my reverie, and I padded across the hardwood floor to answer it. Vivian stood on the other side, her signature power suit traded for a casual sundress, her face radiant with a genuine smile. "Good morning," she greeted me warmly, enveloping me in a sisterly embrace. "I thought I'd stop by and see how you're settling in." I ushered her inside, marveling at how far our relationship had come. Months ago, we had been adversaries, caught in the crosshairs of Alex's deceit. Now, we were allies, bound by a shared experience that had forged an unbreakable bond of trust and respect. "It's perfect," I assured her, gesturing around the cozy living room. "Simple, but perfect." Vivian nodded, her eyes sweeping over the space with a critical but approving gaze. "I'm glad. You deserve a fresh start, Eliza, a chance to rebuild your life on your own terms." We settled onto the plush sofa, and I couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in Vivian's demeanor. Gone was the sharp, calculating persona she had once worn like armor. In its place was a warmth and vulnerability that I had never seen before. "How are things at the company?" I asked, sipping my coffee. Vivian's smile faltered ever so slightly, a hint of weariness creeping into her expression. "It's been a challenge, to say the least. Rebuilding the brand, restoring trust with our partners and shareholders. It's been an uphill battle." "But you're doing it," I reassured her. "You're turning things around, slowly but surely." A spark of pride flickered in her eyes, and she nodded resolutely. "Yes, we are. It's not easy, but I'm determined to reclaim our family's legacy, to show the world that the Preston name still stands for something." As we lapsed into comfortable silence, I couldn't help but reflect on the incredible journey we had both undertaken. From the depths of despair and betrayal, we had risen like phoenixes from the ashes, emerging stronger and more resilient than ever before. The legal battles had been grueling, the emotional toll nearly overwhelming at times. But through it all, we had remained resolute, steadfast in our determination to see justice served and our lives restored. And now, as I looked around my humble abode, I felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. Gratitude for the strength that had carried me through the darkest of times, and for the unwavering support of the woman who had become more than just an ally. She was family, in the truest sense of the word. "Eliza," Vivian's voice broke the silence, her tone earnest. "I know words can never undo the trauma you endured, but I want you to know how deeply sorry I am for not seeing the truth sooner." I reached out, squeezing her hand reassuringly. "You have nothing to apologize for, Vivian. We were both caught in Alex's web of lies. The important thing is that we found our way out, together." A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips, and she nodded, her eyes shining with a mixture of gratitude and understanding. In that moment, I knew that the scars of the past would never fully fade. The memories of Alex's cruelty, the bitter taste of betrayal, would always linger in the shadows of my mind. But I had emerged from the darkness stronger and more resilient than ever before. As I bid farewell to Vivian and settled back into the comfort of my new home, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of hope for the future. The tangled web that had once threatened to strangle me was severed, the monster at its center vanquished, and I was free to chart my own course. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of excitement rather than trepidation. I was no longer a victim, defined by the trauma of my past. I was a survivor, a warrior who had stared down the abyss and emerged victorious. And as I gazed out at the bustling city skyline, a world of possibilities stretched before me, waiting to be embraced with open arms.